Welcome to Everyday Ayurveda with Kate, a podcast that translates ancient wisdom for modern lives. I'm your host, Kate O'Donnell. I've been living and teaching Ayurveda, India's traditional medicine, for over 25 years, and I've authored 4 best-selling books on bringing Ayurveda practices into our lives. If you're tired of battling digestive issues, hormonal imbalances, menopause symptoms, or are seeking a deeper spiritual connection and purpose, you're in the right place. This podcast is for you, offering practical, accessible advice to help you heal through diet, optimize your daily routines, and enhance your overall well-being. Follow this space for insights on a diet that heals, strategies for better digestion, sleep, hormone health, and direction for finding a deep sense of meaning and purpose. Join me, my pod people, for this empowering journey into self-care and self-discovery. Together, we'll explore how to bring balance and vitality into your everyday life. Let's do this. Thanks for being here today, Nidhi. I'm so happy to have you.
I'm so honored to be here. Thank you for having me, Kate.
Yeah, it seems like a long time coming to talk more with you. When I look at your work, I read your forthcoming book, follow you on your social medias. It feels like we're arriving at the similar conclusions and using similar language, to talk about Ayurveda today. So one of the things that's on my mind right now is your backstory. You wrote this really wonderful introduction to your forthcoming book, Your Body Already Knows.
Right.
And, you talk in the bio about, I think our background is different. Our education in Ayurveda is different. I'd love to hear sort of a little more, firstly, about sort of how you came to Ayurveda and what your formal training, if any, was like.
Right. No, I think that's a great place to start, Kate. And actually, not people love talking about my childhood rather than how I arrived at Ayurveda in my formal training. So I will start at my childhood just a little bit. So I grew up in a large joint family, and my grandfather was an Ayurvedic healer. And I always say that Ayurveda was taught to us like a first language. I was immersed into it, which meant that we never used the words or the phrase according to Ayurveda, or we should do this, or we shouldn't do this. But everything was taught to us in terms of rhythms and logic. So just to give you some examples, like my mom would say, hey, come back home, when you see the bats weave into the sky. So, that felt logical that, okay, it gets dark, the bats come up. So we're already making subconscious connections of how this universe works. Or some things as simple as, oh, no, don't consume yogurt at night because you may not have the heat in your gut to digest it. So here, just in that one statement, there's so many messages, right? Like there's heat in the gut. The heat in the gut is not the strongest at night. And yogurt is heavy and probably slimy. So all of those messages, right? So when you're living like that, you have all these downloaded messages that you're immersed into. Now, I was a sensitive girl, and I was always curious about how people react differently to the same stimulus. Now, that reaction is not only just emotionally, but also in terms of their bodies, that 2 of us could go out and play in the sun, me and a cousin of mine, and she could have a stronger reaction and I wouldn't, but also more subtle aspects as mindsets. And, how we would all react differently. If we had a rain day holiday, 5 sisters going to the same school, but if we had a rain holiday, each person will have very different reactions. So, I was always what my family called me, a social scientist, trying to understand behavior as well as how, your body functions. So it was quite natural for me. And yet, I would say it was only in my late teens that I realized that this strong calling for Ayurveda and for understanding the science much more deeper. Initially, I dabbled with a little bit of naturopathy. I looked at other modern nutrition sciences out there. In my early 20s, very early, when I was 21, 22 years old, that's when I said, listen, I need to now get a formal education. I need to find this. It felt very natural. But also I arrived at a point, Kate, where I was like, oh, why did I miss this 22 years? I felt so certain. Back then, I had just moved to the US, and my family was a little alarmed because they said when you were in India, you did not think about this formal education, and now you're in the US and you want to do this, and nobody understands Ayurveda. The truth is, 21 years ago, nobody understood Ayurveda.
Right.
But, Kate, it didn't matter because it was just this strong calling. I used to tell everybody, and it sounds so childish now, but I believed in it, that I just want to have Ayurveda in every breath, in every moment of my consciousness. I want to be living with this science so that in my next lifetime, I'm not waiting 22 years. And I was like, that's fine. Even if I get nowhere with it, I still want to be able to live with it every single moment. I was very fortunate because what I stumbled upon then is this Gurukulam type institution. And it's really funny because I think only 15 students have ever graduated from there. And what it did is it invited teachers from, this very good Pune. Pune is a city near Mumbai. This Pune university called Tilak Mahavidyalaya, which is one of the best Ayurveda universities out there, and invited their best teachers to come here each month on rotation, month after month after month, and teach us. But these were like these long classes, so 12 hours, 14 hours a day. And I did that for 4 or 5 years. And that was my formal education in Ayurveda. So, of course, everything that I learned growing up, I mean, I also had a lot of exposure to my, seasonal foods, my aunt sitting and grinding herbs and giving bhavnas. I mean, all these technicalities, right? So all of that learning was happening. And then I topped it up with a formal education in classical Ayurveda, which means you study only from the textbooks and nothing else, from the ancient textbooks. I am very, very grateful because I don't think they didn't have a class after my batch of 7, 8 students. They had one before us, which was again of 7, 8 students. So I think altogether 15, 16 students have only ever graduated from that institution. And I was very lucky to do that. And then my journey just evolved. Of course, as you may have read in my book, I wasn't satisfied. When you get out of Ayurveda college, you just assume that you are going to practice like everybody else does. And you kind of fall into that trap for a little bit. But when I started a practice which felt prescriptive, that you come to me and I tell you what to do, I tell you how to eat, I tell you what your dosha is, and I tell you what herbs you should take. And people felt better. So I felt good in the short term, but over a period of time, it set them onto this path of dependency and despair. And it's really like giving away your power. And I realized that's not how it meant to be. Growing up in an Ayurvedic family with 14 members, 9 women, it was not like that. We understood our bodies, and I knew there was a way possible. So then my work has transitioned a little bit from, just how Ayurveda is conventionally practiced to a little bit deeper practice.
Would you say you've moved from like doing less one-to-ones, less clinical practice, and are you working with more groups, sort of teaching the principles?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Kate, I'm teaching principles, I'm teaching self-evaluation, and I'm teaching tools that you can use by yourself. So you can really design a sickness-free life. You don't want to just feel better from your existing sickness or existing symptom today, but you want to be able to design a life which allows you to remain sickness-free. Yeah. And that is really my primary focus. And that's the work I find most fulfilling.
Right, right. So you're really working on helping people integrate traditional principles into their lives the way they are today, which is, I think, not always easy, sometimes overwhelming. What's your favorite format or the most effective format you're finding to do that?
I'm finding group work to actually be more effective. For group work, I exclusively work with women. And I think women, we give so much of ourselves. I say we're constantly showing up and saying shut up to ourselves, and that lack of ease we carry then becomes disease. But it's remarkable to see women from different parts of the world with completely different upbringing, but the same underlying sentiment that women carry across the planet. So that group gives, like I say, it's like geese flying north. When women come together and they do this together, the torque is 10x. The amount of inspiration you can find is 10x of what you would do alone. And in that, I think large transformations happen. So that I find to be one of the most effective ways to be working today.
Right. I have definitely found the same to be true. Again, I think it's hard to, in the clinical format, you sort of do the assessment, you make the recommendations for the person, and then they go back into their life alone where everyone's doing something else. So, okay, you're not supposed to have the 5 cups of coffee that everyone in your office is having, or you're not supposed to have the late dinner that everyone else is inviting you to. So I feel like that's how I ended up doing more group work in order to provide space, where people could feel like they're not the only person in their world trying to do this.
Exactly. And that's a great point, so that people, firstly, don't feel they're crazy. Secondly, like you have short stories to share, and you have like sometimes people find simple hacks, tools, and when you hear from one another, it becomes so easy. And then my other reason is I'm like, when women heal, like the whole world can heal, because when a mother heals, whole family heals. The whole family heals, communities heals. Communities heal, the whole world can heal. Also, Kate, like our grandmothers, our mothers didn't have this opportunity. They were living in times where there was no concept of like a woman creating this, doing this inner work and finding this inner power and healing. So this is such a remarkable time in history where women are able to really do this work and undo what they've been carrying for generations. So what they pass on is different from what they receive. So I feel very, very strongly about this work, and I'm very grateful to be able to do it.
Right. Yes. And I do think you mentioned women from all over the world, different stages of life, kind of working together. I think we also have people listening from all over the world, different stages of life. So when you say you're seeing the same kind of symptoms, what are you seeing? What are women struggling with right now?
Right. So, of course, there's physical symptoms and there's a psychological reality. And with women at large, and I'm talking about women of all, whether it's a successful type A banker in New York City or somebody sitting in a farm in Australia, what I find common is women give up one part of themselves to be some other part. So whether there is a woman who's given up her ambition to be a mother, or there's a woman who's given up the desire to be a mother for her ambition, but it's like we have created this burnout model, and they're all burning out, right? Mostly, whether there's like a woman who's feeling burnt out because of her household responsibilities, or a woman who's feeling burnt out because of the excessive work and unfulfilled because there's a part of her that remains unfulfilled. And it does not. And in the body, of course, it starts off differently, but most often I would say digestion and hormones. It starts off with, then moves into anxiety and insomnia. And then before you know it, there's like this whole chronic imbalance happening in the body, and that continues to spiral into different conditions. But like it is so possible to go back to the root and say that, this whole idea of you can have it all, it's a very far reach, but the truth is you can honor all parts of yourself and provide that rest and repair that your body needs. And very often, whether you're choosing to do A or B or C, there's this perfection that women seek. And
Yes.
it's a way to dial back from that perfection. So you can really tap into all parts of yourself, enjoy all parts of yourself without feeling that burnout. So a big part of the work I do to Kate is to provide toolkits for people. There's constant repair, and I'll tell you, it turns out to be so effective to be able to use your tools, and people can choose from the tools. We give them a whole a la carte menu of tools, and people choose from their tools.
Could you share a couple of your favorite tools?
Yeah. And, basically I say that there are three types of tools: preventative tools, like tools that you use every day so that you are rewiring your chemistry even before you get on the battlefield of life. And then the second is battlefield tools, which are in the moment when that intensity of that trigger hits and you're feeling that way. What do you use? And then there are healing tools, like repair tools, that how do you heal from the day? And the more preventative you do, the less you need to do of the battlefield, because your body really automatically, subconsciously knows how to go back into repair. But I would say anything. I tell people, whether you start at, with just classical music playing in your background, to a daily Abhyanga oil practice, to meditation, to alternate nostril breathing, pick 2 or 3 practices that you do every single day. And when you're doing them, you're so connected, you're so grounded that your body has the memory of how this safety feels. So that when you're on the battlefield, then the tools look quite different. Just like humming, you're in the kitchen, you're feeling tense, you're driving, you just start humming, because the exhalation puts your body into a parasympathetic mode. When you're humming, you're essentially exhaling through your nose. And so you find some of those battlefield tools as well. Or the other battlefield tools are you just go, you splash some cold water, reset your nervous system. And then repair tools could be like either you're journaling, you're working with a therapist. You may not need repair tools every day, even though I find it a little bit useful, even some level of introspection. And I feel like when we would do that, the amount of clarity we would have in our lives, right? So And I say to undo a habit, you need to undo yourself first. And it doesn't matter. I can write you the perfect plan, which you think is feasible for your food and your exercise and your sleep. And you're like, oh, this is feasible. This is doable. And yet most of us find ourselves in that roadblock where we're like, oh my God, that the programs that I'm carrying within myself for so many years feel stronger than this easy plan that's in front of me. So to change those programs that we've been carrying, you need all of those tools. So when we hit those moments, we know how to undo and move ahead.
Yeah. And so we've got prevention, on the battlefield, and repair. That makes so much sense, the way you just laid it out there. So I've been learning these things since I was maybe, I might say, too young to need tools. Everything was easy in my early 20s. So I've been really practicing, the Ayurvedic dinacharya, the routine, the clock, all these things. I haven't had late dinners regularly, probably ever in my life. But as I get older, in mid to late 40s now, it feels like these repair tools are becoming of the moment. I'm noticing that I really need like that every day and not the other. And I also am feeling like I need to reduce battlefield exposure. So it's like, it's so interesting how it's shifting for me, in the mid 40s, that, the prevention, it's like, ooh, no, it's getting real now, and I need more repair. And it's, you live in New York City, right? Yeah. So it's such an intense place. And do you work with a lot of people who are really on the battlefield a lot of the time?
Yeah, and I feel like even seemingly those who are not on the battlefield, there's always the battlefield, and the battlefield is inside, right? Because you're carrying the battles from your childhood, and you're carrying the battles from, so I feel like the longer we carry our battles, then, and sometimes repair is just from those little battles. Sometimes repair is not from a life incident. Sometimes repair is not from something major that happens. And that's something like we all need to heal from the day. If we could all heal from the day, then we don't gather that debris and take it forward into our lives, right? So I do. And yet I would say that, Kate, having these tools has allowed me to find a monastery in New York City, like to find that same peace inside that feels very quiet and nice. So I know it is possible. And I do see a lot of people, but surprisingly, even people in different parts of the world, I would say they have the same battlefield experience. If it's not outside, it's inside.
Regardless of whether they live, say, in a city or in the country.
The challenges are different, right? For example, I recently worked with somebody who was caring for her, she has two young children that she's homeschooling, 10 and 8. And she's living with her parents she became a mother much later in her life. So her parents are in their 80s, and her father has some serious neurodegenerative issues. And so Kate, she's feeling the intensity in every moment. And then there could be somebody who's running to work in New York City, picking up a banana from a deli, and, breaking up with a boyfriend simultaneously, but also worrying about whether she'll ever have babies. So everybody has their battles, right? They're different in nature. So I'd say I haven't found that a place or an external situation changes the nature of your battles within, like you can still have the same intensity, but those who use their tools the most have the lowest impact.
Yeah, it's so great. I love that. So it's the tools are, do you find that people embrace the tools willingly, or does it take some time?
Oh, so it takes time to master the tools, right? I mean, listen, this person who's not sat quietly and observe their breath, or even just, just been with sitting in stillness with yourself is one of the most hardest things for people who've not done it for lifetimes, right? And that's why, Kate, my personal practice allows people to say, you just pick music in the background. It's okay. You don't have to do this. You put your legs up against a wall in Viparit Karni at night, So it is hard for people to go and go to the most deepest, the most effective tools. So we start where they're at. And a lot of times people will start at the easiest tools, like taking a dance class, listening to it, like having music playing in the background, or putting their legs up against the wall. Or maybe then they'll be more encouraged and they'll say, okay, now I'm going to try alternate nostril breathing. Now I have some grounding. And then they'll try alternate nostril breathing. And then they might try another type of breath work. And then they might say, okay, I'll do a 5-minute meditation and take it from there. So it is a journey. And I always tell people that set realistic expectations for yourself. and expect it to be a journey. You're not there today, but sometimes people get impatient. They're like, "Oh, what? This was impossible. And I couldn't, I still felt so triggered." And I say that the fact that you are aware, you're already on the path. I said, imagine if you were in darkness.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine if you were still living that life and you were really strengthening those triggers and creating those deep, dense knots in your, psychosomatic plane. What would that manifest as? So the fact that you're becoming aware is already progress. So it takes a while for people to master their tools, but people embrace the idea of tools very quickly.
Right. I often describe a period of time where you start to have that awareness and the tools are yet new. And the difficulty there, it's like I sort of warn people before we start, that there will be a period of time where you're noticing the symptoms, you're noticing the need for the tools, and yet you haven't kind of mastered that yet. And there's this difficult interim there where you're seeing it all the time, whereas previously maybe we didn't. It's such an important part of the process, but that's the time I think where the people maybe struggle the most.
That's actually a very interesting point. You're absolutely right, right? Because now the problem is in your face, right? Sometimes it's like if you don't it's not there. Sometimes people don't go for blood, like just as an analogy. Sometimes people don't go for blood tests because they're like, if I don't know what's happening in my body, I don't have to worry about it. So you're so right that this becomes that transition place, is that place where you actually know, you feel it, you see the problem, but you're still learning how to resolve.
Yes. Which interestingly, when I started practicing, I lived in Boston at the time. And I was seeing a lot of college students just because there's so many schools in that city. And I started to notice that people were coming to me around the age of 25, 26 with digestive problems. You mentioned sort of how we start to see the problems in digestion and sometimes hormones, and then it moves from there into your anxiety, insomnia, and then more chronic, more complicated illnesses to follow. So I was catching people in that early stage, of the development of imbalances over and over again, just because it's like people had gone from their home situation where potentially a lot of the healthy routines are baked in, and they had been living from the age of, say, 18, 19, and now they're 25 and they've been, doing whatever, eating whenever, So was super excited when you told me about your new book and that you're looking to reach a millennial group with this book. So I'm so excited about that and very curious your process writing. What did you feel was important to reach these folks?
So, Kate, what I felt normally is that my voice reached millennials. Like that was not my intention first when I started writing, started doing the work that I do, and it just ended up reaching the millennials. And I realized one of the reasons that it did, and I wish I could say, is because I presented it with so much science, and that's not actually the reason. That didn't happen for me. Is that this younger generation really loves science, but also likes to use their logic, also likes trust placed in them. So the book is written in a manner that like your body already knows. And I will show you the other rhythms and connections in the universe out there. I will show you logical connections that you can make in your mind and experience in your body so that you can understand and follow through rather than just give you a prescription. So I know I have a 16-year-old, but I have plenty of nieces and nephews in that age group who are millennials, like 20s and late 20s and all of that. And I know that, this is a generation that is so like having this battle that, of faith in themselves. And I think the book definitely places faith in your own ability to heal and also gives you all of those connections that it makes sense. I personally tell people, I said, please don't buy anything that I say, nothing, unless you can bring it through your logical brain, unless it feels logical to you, just don't believe me. And so that was in the back of my mind when I was writing the book as well, that how do I deliver that sentiment so that it's accessible to everybody?
Yes, right. So the difference between sort of being told that this is what you should do versus here's some experiments that you can try and see how you feel.
Yes. Yes, this is the experiment. This is the logic behind the experiment. This is how you can see the experiment playing out outside of your body. This is where you can make the connection. And now you can try it. You invite you to try it. So through logical connection, you invite them to do an experiment that they can now see. So I think that's what makes a difference.
Right. And you do that really well, Nidhi, the way that you present the logic. It's so great because I love that you don't just go for hard science. You might pull that in at times, but not in the way that people might expect an Ayurvedic doctor to do, when you're trying to reach a Western audience. It's more that you have these sort of like metaphors and
Yes,
analogies that are very like real in your life.
basically.
So one of these that I think is also fantastic is this, you've got the lingo of inner climate that you're using a lot. Could you explain for listeners sort of what this is?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to start at the top by saying that, listen, life exists on planet Earth because the climate was right. Nobody had to do anything from single
Yeah.
cell organisms to like this full-fledged. Now, today we have all of these trillions of species that find their home on this planet, right? So can you imagine, like, just climate is right, life does life. 4.5 billion years, we've only thrived, we've been thriving, we've evolved. And today we're beginning to question the existence of life or the continuation of life on our planet because of global warming, because the climate has gone wrong. Now we are questioning life. So we established this that, listen, climate is right, life will thrive. You buy a plant, and if as long as the plant gets its water, its sunlight in the right proportion that it's meant to, the plant will thrive. And you don't need to be a farmer, a botanist, a gardener to know that. It's just, this is the most logical, basic, fundamental truth of life. Right? Everything else comes later. Then you buy your plant food, then you buy something else, then you buy a fifth thing, but you need the climate first. Similarly, our body is home to trillions of microorganisms inside our body, the microbiome, microbiota, that more and more people today in the world, in the Western world, are discovering that is really what is the prerequisite to health, because they support in your digestion, in your hormones, in your immune system, in your nervous regulation, everything. They're like, oh my God, these little guys in here are doing all of this. And of course, just like everything else, if you would buy a plant, the first thing you would see is what does it need to, what is the climate it needs to survive? Or you buy a seed that you want to plant into your soil, you're going to see, can it even grow here? So similarly, the microbiome needs a certain climate inside the body to thrive. And Ayurveda found this climate many years ago, but unfortunately, it didn't articulate it. So my concept of inner climate is actually articulating what that climate is. So I'm assuming that most of the audience is familiar with Ayurveda, so I'm going to just assume that already, right? So the climate inside the body is warm and moist, like our breath, like our blood, like the mother's milk, like our reproductive fluids, like how Florida is in March, where flora and fauna is at its best. And, as is the macro, such as the micro, as is the micro, such as the macro. That is the climate, where the balance of the sun and the moon, the sun comes and heats and dehydrates everything, the moon comes and moistens everything. So that mid place, right? Warm and moist is where life thrives. Now, I want to bring it to this Ayurvedic lens, right? We know that kapha is cold and humid. Treating kapha would mean introducing heat to it. But if you introduce too much heat, you imbalance pitta. So you would stop at a place that's warm and moist. So the cold and humid, you would balance and stop when it's warm and moist. Pitta is hot and humid. You would start cooling therapies, but you can't go too cold because you're going to imbalance. You're going to either tick off kapha or maybe perhaps vata. So you're going to stop and say, okay, hey, Pitta, you're too hot, but let me bring you to a place of warmth. Similarly, if it's humid, you bring it to a place of moist. Vata is cold and dry. Again, the opposite is warm and moist. So if warm and moist is where kapha cannot be imbalanced in warm and, when it's warm and moist, pitta cannot be imbalanced when it's warm and moist, vata cannot be imbalanced if it's warm and moist. It is our breath, it is our blood, it is our milk, it is the kind of people we like. We like warm people. Anger is hot, anxiety is dry, stress can be hot and dry, depression is really humid and sluggish. Love, gratitude, compassion is warm and moist. So warm and moist is where life thrives, is where life gravitates. So when our inner climates go off, either they become too dense and sluggish, metabolic syndrome, obesity, diabetes, or they become overly, like global warming, let's say it has become too hot and, it can lead to inflammation, which I call global warming inside the body. I teach people to identify. I think the dosha jargon can be very confusing. So the inner climate concept does two things. Firstly, it takes away the dosha jargon, allows people to understand the landscape of their body and the climate of their body. The climate will always affect the landscape. right? So it allows, but more importantly, it shows them what is balance, where is homeostasis, which means even in your psyche, right? When you're in flow, you're feeling warm and moist, but you start at all points. You bring in warm and moist in every area of your life. Like Ayurvedic cooking is always warm and moist. We start with the oil, we put the spices. Cooking by itself releases moisture, is a warming process. All oils are warm and moist. Everything is warm and moist. So we replenish, we bring back the warm and moist. We understand your own landscape. We understand where we're heading. One of the reasons why it's so hard to heal ourselves is because we don't know what is homeostasis unless we see it on a blood report or our vital exam. So I want people to start understanding that place of warm and moist. And then imbalance begins every time we deviate from that. So you could just be feeling a rush, a trigger inside, which is usually hot and dry for people. Or you could be feeling this immense withdrawal, which feels dense and sluggish for people, like almost humid. So you want to start identifying, So once again, if I pick cold food, if I pick a cold smoothie, it's fine. I tell people you do everything you want once in a while, but you understand what you're doing so you can balance it accordingly. So you keep things, I said, even if you never know your own inner climate and its deviation, just keep moving towards warm and moist. Like that is, to me, that has been my life-changing idea and concept. And it's made a drastic difference to the work I do.
Because people understand it better?
Yeah, and also like this idea of warm and moist has not been articulated before because people know what homeostasis feels like. People understand how to identify the imbalance when it begins. People learn to identify the imbalance when they're creating the cause, when they're eating something that's cold and dense. They understand it not because Ayurveda says no or not because it can aggravate my kapha, but because it's not warm and moist. So people know how to make those warm and moist choices. And so much of our disease is triggered by dis-ease in the mind today. And Kate,
True.
of the varied lifestyles we have, the amount we travel, the amount of foods available to us, temperature-controlled environments, electricity. So to have this idea, right, of understanding when that deviation happens within is so important.
Right. So a person could feel too cold, too dry, too hot, or also too moist.
Yeah.
Like heavy. Could you give a couple examples of what are the things that you see happening often culturally that cause those imbalanced qualities?
Yeah. So, like I would say that somebody who's very cold and humid and, is building more, like everything is stagnated in their body. They're probably more sedentary. They've probably been more in denial. They've not been able to express. So their coping mechanism has become food and Netflix and all of that. And then they gravitate towards more cheesy, heavier, colder foods because that allows them the kind of it's a self-fulfilling condition where that's their coping mechanism. It makes them more sedentary. Now the inner climate has become so sluggish. So in the mind as well, it's sometimes when, of course, your family lifestyle habits come into way. Your genetic framework comes into place as well. What you're carrying genetically, what your family lifestyle and diet habits are, but also the way you've dealt with your emotions. If you're in denial, then usually you can end up going that way. And then people who are very, very type A, very driven, overly productive, obsessed with being productive, they end up being very hot and dry in their bodies. And that often represents as well, the previous cold and humid can be obesity in the long term, obesity, very sluggish digestion, toxicity in the body, diabetes, high blood pressure. When you become really hot and dry, it often starts as like burning sensations in the body, sensitivity to heat, extreme dryness. Your hair can start graying out, right? So that's if everything is burning out, like in the body, there's an electrical burnout. Eventually, it can lead to more serious skin conditions, neurodegenerative disorders, just even, other psychiatric conditions. So these are just two scenarios. People could be overly hot and humid as well, where there's a lot of this heat, like lava in their system. So there could be different climates. And I tell people, you don't have to know your climate 100%, right? If you ask me, Kate, in spite of doing this, because my body is evolving, I don't know my inner climate at all. It's not a standard inner climate, it deviates. But what I'm able to identify is like, it's become really hot and dry these days. So I'm able to identify that and then bring the antidotes, even in the cycle of a month, right? Like for women, the first half of your monthly cycle will feel more humid, will feel more grounding, will feel all of that. Like ovulation time, there's a little bit more passion, there's a little bit more inspiration. And then things start to kind of becoming hot and dry. So your personality becomes hot and dry. So you know how to balance, how to bring in relief accordingly. But your inner climate can be changing and evolving month to month, morning to evening, and yet there could be a baseline. So I tell people, don't get overly obsessed, but just notice what's happening in your body and keep it all warm and moist when in doubt.
I think another thing we've both been talking about in the women's health sector is how the hot and dry qualities, that seems to be the troublemaker.
Absolutely. Right. I mean, also women are lunar beings, right? I mean, the epitome, like, or the imagination, the visualization of like this woman, feminine woman is a lunar goddess. And I'm only talking not in terms of biologically, right? Like the amount of moisture our bodies hold and need to hold. Firstly, we carry the egg. Eggs are laid in fluid places everywhere in the world. And lack of those fluidity. In fact, when you look at fertile soil, when we talk about fertile soil, moisture is one of the first aspects of fertility that we look at. And even if somebody never wants to have, even if you never want to plant a single seed in your backyard soil, you don't want it to be dry and parched. You know, when you look at like cracked land and like really parched land, you know that it's just not healthy. Forget the fact that you may never want to plant anything there. So it's even with women, when we're so dry, imagine like the breast milk, the amniotic fluid, like the menstrual fluids, like women are these lunar water churning, fluid churning beings. And you're right, we've just become so hot and dry, this obsession with being overproductive, eating excessive amounts of protein, just being on the go, 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 caffeine, alcohol, mind being completely on overdrive. So we have become like that.
Right. And I do think a lot of it has to do with how much we do, how productive we are.
Yeah, it is such a do culture. And you know what's beautiful, Kate, and I'm sure you know this too, that in the yogic world, right, like your breaths are counted. They're limited. And the shorter your breaths, the faster you use them. And when we're in this do mode, our breath is very, very short. It's not relaxed. So when we're living in those short breaths, we're shortening our lifespan. We're burning our fuel. It's only a matter of time that our fire burns out and we burn out.
Right. I love that you're bringing in this concept of the breath and that it's like we don't breathe. We don't take the time to breathe. That's something I go through my days and I'm very aware of breathing a lot of the time. How much I'm inhaling, how much I'm exhaling. One of the tools I've heard you discuss that is something I do a lot also is to focus on the exhale. I find that a really helpful way to slow it down. Because even, if you lengthen an exhale, you lengthen your lifespan, is what you're saying. Right?
Basically, either you hold your breath, but then that's a practice. You don't want to be holding your breath in the middle of a task. You don't. But if you have a yogic practice, then you can. And you're basically exhale. It's like when you're on a do day, right? And everybody who's listening, this is a moment. This is a reminder to really check in with your breath and to slow it down. Because if you slow down your exhale, you slow down your life, and you slow down your aging, and you slow down everything else. But basically, on that exhale, right? It's your body goes into parasympathetic mode. And when you're having a very busy go day, very often we'll find ourselves sitting and our body forcing that exhale. Right? Because it's not had that chance to have a full exhale. So it is such an important reminder to just slow down that exhale. The body will go into repair. And how beautiful, right? Like, Kate, we have this repair tool every second of our life. On the busiest days, on the most stressful days, when crisis hits, it's when I find myself tuning most into those exhales, like leaning into those exhales. Because the inhale is doing and the exhale is being. And you just want to go into being even while you're doing.
Yeah, which I love that concept, going into being even while you're doing. Because what I see with myself, a lot of my community as well, is we want to make all of the triggers go away. We feel like that's the answer, some reducing battlefield exposure, like that's the answer. Whereas actually, no, it's you go through the day. It's the same day, in story number 1 and in story number 2. You do the same amount of things and you have the same amount of stress. It's how you're approaching the day, and how sort of present you are to the tools as you go through the day. So I do think it's mind training, and our inability to remain focused, on the goal of health and of maintaining the being aspect of ourselves, no matter what we're doing. What I have found over the course of the life thus far is that's a hard thing to learn how to do. And that's a hard thing to maintain. It's like Jedi mind training.
Yes.
Yeah.
And like, but those are the moments of nirvana. They're the moment of perfect dissolution when you can do and still be. Like I know, Kate, when I do the work that we love, right? When we all get lost in space and time, when you've had that moment, whether it's on a tennis court, whether it's when you're just lost, you're in awe and wonder, you've lost connection with your name and who you are, but you're just present. So that idea, when you can do and still be, really brings you to that present moment. The exhale brings you to that present moment, and you find perfect flow, and you stop aging because time stops, and you have perfect dissolution. You're no one, you're nothing in that moment. And I think really the challenge of life is how many more moments can you find? How many moments can you find in your life like that? So while as an Ayurvedic doctor, I teach digestion, I teach you how to eat, I teach you how to balance your hormones, I teach you how to sleep better. But I really think this is where the opportunity of human life lies, because whatever your lifestyle is, you will eventually decay. We all decay. Like that is the dharma of the human body. But how do you want to do? How do you want to make the most out of each moment by finding the present moment, moment after moment?
Right. And I find that aim is baked into yoga as well as Ayurveda. Did you learn these two side by side in your family?
I learned it all together. So you're right.
Yeah.
Like I basically
Yeah.
learned it together. I don't even know what ideas came from where. And, so I think it was just all an immersion of it all. I've seen my
Mhm.
parents practice asana and meditation and pranayam since I was born every single day, but I was exposed to it more formally when I was 8.
So you have a teacher, someone actually taught you asanas and yoga. Yeah.
So we had a
Hmm.
teacher come in. And it's funny that after so many years, I still remember some of the things that he said, right? Because I am certain that I had this curiosity carried from another lifetime, because I was always like trying to make connections and see all of that. So yeah, I feel very, very fortunate. And yet I would say that, a lot of this, eventually you have to do the work yourself, no matter what you receive, and you have to make the connections yourself. And then that's why my entire journey has been literally about your body already knows. Because, the whole idea of constantly leaning into information outside has become so, like this whole idea has become so prevalent versus leaning into your insights within.
Yeah, it is key. And it's such a great title for this book that's coming.
Like,
Your body already knows. Yeah, it's right away when you sent me the copy, I was like, oh, perfect title. Yeah, because it says it all. It says it all. Like that is the whole point right there.
yeah.
And Nidhi, I think you have the honey, like you've got the honey and all the bees, they will want to come to you. What is the best way for people to work with you?
So I think the best way to people to work with me, of course, if you're interested by my book, that gives you a lot of understanding. If you want to work deeper, sign up for one. I have a full body reset program. I have a
Nice.
healing program, and I do offer some one-on-one. I'm back to offering some one-on-one, but that is harder. That is more, I do that sparingly. But otherwise, I would say, the full body reset or the deep healing, depending on what you're feeling invited to do. But one of these group programs. You can also find me on Instagram. I post pretty regularly, small snippets of content. So that's my underscore Ayurvedic underscore life. You can find me on my
Mhm.
website, nidhi.me.
Thank you. That's great. And we'll put all that in the show notes for our listeners. How do you feel about 3 rapid fire questions to end?
Fire on.
Super. So the thing I'm ask all our guests is, what is the first thing that you do when you get up in the morning?
Thank God, I've just given up looking at my phone, but I had
Oh
become
no.
a little bit, but no, not anymore. I think the first thing that I do when I wake up is in my bed, I check in with my breath. That's a subconscious thing that I just kind of do. It's conditioned now. And I try to get inspired for the day. So I kind of go through the day in my mind, the morning, afternoon, evening. So it's a mental exercise that I
Mm.
start with when my mind is still in between, still in that sub high brainwave patterns. That's what I do. That's the first thing that I do in my bed.
I love their true confessions of the phone.
Yeah, yeah, because
Yeah.
there was so much happening back home, and then you get
Mm.
addicted, and things are settled, and you're still looking at the phone,
Yes, it's like that.
which for many, many years I was amazing about, and then now I have periods back and on and off.
Yeah. Yeah. I've noticed that it's happening to me at night because We're having the sound issues in the home. So I haven't bought a sound machine. I'm using one on my phone. And just last night we were like, nope, this is over. We're buying a sound machine because if the phone is around,
Basically, if the phone is around, like the only way to do it is leave your phone somewhere else, right?
exactly.
Those like traditional alarm clocks, which
Yep.
I miss, by the way, like the actual clocks, not digital when I was a young girl. But yeah, I wish to bring one of those back into my life.
Oh yeah. Except, I used to have one of those in India and it was always wrong. It would over time, it would slowly get slower. So I would be like late for the yoga class because of the alarm clock.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. I
Yeah.
mean, honestly, I think digital clocks have made the expectation to be dot on time much higher. Because earlier,
True.
I totally remember, Kate, like you could be 10 minutes, say, oh, hey, listen, my watch is 10 minutes fast or 10 minutes slow, and
Right.
okay, that didn't feel like anything.
Right. So I think it's wonderful for people to hear us talk about it. It just makes everyone feel like, ooh, we can all exhale. This is really hard. And that the only answer is to keep the phone away somewhere
Yes.
else.
And
Yeah.
the struggle is real for all of us.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, super. So tell us, what is the first thing that goes in the body? The first food or drink?
Okay, if I'm not on any herbs, then it's my cup of hot milk, always spiced according to the season. A little bowl of overnight soaked and peeled almonds. That's my favorite breakfast in the world, day after day after day.
The soaked almonds.
The soaked almonds and the milk together. I don't know, it's an intoxicating.
Mm. Ooh, nice. I like that. I've also heard you discuss your love of chai, which I share. That
Yeah.
happens later though, right?
Chai in the mornings, and I don't do chai every day. There are periods, don't get me wrong. There are periods where I'll do chai every day. So chai happens. If it happens, it'll happen 7 days a week, and it will not happen at all. These days,
Right.
I've been not drinking chai at all. I do drink a cappuccino on Saturdays. That's what I do. Like my weekend is like, okay, I want to go and get a cappuccino. But these days, I've not been drinking chai because, especially, I've recently come back from India, and when I'm settling, back from jet lag, I avoid all caffeine.
Right. That's wise. Yes. Yeah. Chai is such a lovely thing. I love it so much. Yeah. Last question is, what is your non-negotiable wind down routine in the evening?
I mean, it's very, very basic, but something that I will not give up even on the busiest days is using an oil cleansing my face and then massaging my face with some oil.
Mhm.
That I would not change. So I wish I could say it's a foot massage because I want that to be a non-negotiable, but it ends up being like oil on my face. Like I don't know why it feels very grounding and soothing. Without that, I can't get into bed.
Right. Oil on the face. Oh, I love it. Thank you so much. Thanks for being here and sharing your background, your story, your wisdom. And you're so good at the way that you bring it forward. So
Thank
I'm
you
just,
so much,
yeah.
Kate. And I mean, you do amazing work, and I'm so glad that we can collaborate. And I look forward to many more collaborations.
Yeah, me too. Thank you.
Yeah.